Right guys, day 4, Thursday, and we're down to our 2-hour eating window, our first real extensive fasting window. I'm doing this video from the car today because it's far too cold to get out because it's -1 degree here. So we'll be sitting here chatting today. So what we want to talk about today is carbohydrates. Alright, we talked about protein, we're going to talk about carbohydrates. For me guys, carbohydrates is the one that you need to understand. You really need to understand. We need to understand protein. Just like we said, it's very interesting, good, it makes a lot of sense. But we need to understand carbohydrates and its function, its role in our body, and as a fuel source, and why do we eat it. So first of all, the word carbohydrate basically means a carbon molecule that has been hydrated with water, H2O. So carbon and H2O. That's basically what carbohydrate means. Now, why do we eat carbohydrates? We eat carbohydrates, well, a wee bit of your cellular construction, what you're made of. There's some of it's made of carbohydrates, I suppose, carbon. But the only reason we eat carbohydrates is for fuel. One reason and one reason only, for fuel. Now we talked about petrol, right? Or we talked about protein. Now protein, what I want you to think of protein, I'm sitting in a car here, right? Carbohydrates is petrol in the tank. Protein is oil in the engine. Both can be burnt, right? We can burn oil, we can burn petrol. Both come from pretty much the same molecular thing, right? They both came from the one source, but we use them very differently in the car. I don't want to burn petrol. I don't want to make sure, I don't want to have too little, or sorry, we can burn oil, but I don't want to have too little oil in that engine, or the engine's just not going to work right. So if I don't eat enough protein, my daily requirements amount of protein, this engine won't work properly. It'll systematically start to break down. Exactly the same if there's no oil in it. So whenever we talk about having your daily recommended amount of protein, that 1 gram per pound of body weight, that's, if you put your dipstick in the engine, that's your level of oil in the engine, so that engine functions properly. So when I put my foot in the gas, that engine will go. Alright, that's my metabolic function in the car, the combustion sort of function. Right. So carbohydrates is basically petrol in the tank. Now the thing about the human body, the body doesn't just store the energy the way the petrol tank does. So imagine my car today is going to drive 100 miles. I want to make sure I have 100 miles worth of fuel in that petrol tank. Right, fine. But what you have to remember in this scenario, if you have body fat, this car here now is towing a wee petrol tank at the back, a wee reserve tank. And that wee reserve tank is full up of petrol that I didn't use that day, so I stored it to get it later. So if I travel 100 miles today and I put in 200 miles worth of fuel, there's 100 miles worth of fuel too much. That's going to, at the end of the day, it's going to go in that wee reserve tank because I didn't use it today. So I will always wake up with an empty fuel tank because the fuel will keep circulating. It's not just sitting there, it's circulating around the system. If it's not been used, it'll be stored to get later. But the problem is, if you have body fat on your body, right, we keep waking up the next day and putting more petrol in the tank that we don't use. Then we wake up the next day and we put more petrol in the tank that we don't use. Imagine having a full petrol tank and every time you see a petrol station, you stop and you stick in 100 miles worth of fuel. Well, it's overflowed, it's stored as fat. You drive down the road a wee bit, oh, there's another petrol station. You stop, you put in more petrol, it's overflowed, it's stored in the wee reserve tank. You see another petrol station, and then your friend phones you up, do you want to meet me at the petrol station? And we'll have a wee yarn. Then you stop for at another petrol station and you put in more fuel. And that's literally what carbohydrates is, because it's got one function and one function only in your body, and that's to provide you with energy. Energy that you want to use now. Right? It's not really designed for energy to use later, it's designed for energy to be used now in your petrol tank. What happens is, remember we said we've got a wee reserve tank, the body has to store that carbohydrates as fat in the reserve tank, which makes it a lot harder to get at. Alright, so what we need to think about here is the carbohydrate requirement. Like, I give you a protein number, right? So how many carbohydrates should I eat per day? That depends on how hard or how fast you drive your car, right? Specifically, driving it hard and intensely. So imagine your body, sorry folks, I'm showing my eye. Imagine your body's been like a hybrid car. We can use fat for fuel, or we can use carbs for fuel, right? Now, if I'm just dooting along and I'm nice and steady and just cruising around town and I'm not really accelerating while fast, I don't really need to speed off, the body will use fat. In this case, imagine a hybrid engine. The body will use petrol or electricity. So we've got a battery and petrol. A hybrid car, I'm sure some of you understand, it is a wee bit technical too, I suppose, but a hybrid engine, it's got petrol, it's got electricity, and it's got petrol. All right, I'm cruising along, I'm just using the electricity because my energy demands aren't that high. All of a sudden I need the accelerator out of the way, I need explosive energy. The body has to use petrol because it's quicker, it's easier to burn up faster. That's carbohydrates. So if I'm just cruising along, I can just use fat for fuel. Happy days, there's not much demand here. If I want to put my foot in the gas, I want carbohydrates stored in the muscle to go. So for example, if I'm going to jump in big heavy weights, they make the muscle bigger and stronger. Carbohydrates are great to have because there's fuel sitting there in the muscle ready to go. All right, stored as glycogen. So the carbohydrate we eat will break down as glucose, and then glucose then will be stored as glycogen. But forget, it doesn't really matter which term we call it. Let's just call it carbohydrates, right? So even if it's glucose or fructose or whatever, we're trying to make this as easy for you to understand as possible. So we're removing a wide lot of steps here. Do you know what I mean? Like glycolysis and all that kind of stuff. So let's just really simplify it. So carbohydrates is fuel. So you ask yourself, what are my energy demands day to day? What's the heaviest thing I lift? What's the most explosive energy I use in a day? Am I going to the gym to really beat the life out of myself in a weight session or a spin class or something really high energy demanding? Or do I just go for walks, or do I just do it about? Right, well then the amount of carbohydrates you need is very, very slim, because let's be honest, you've got a reserve tank at your tone, and we want to tap into the reserve tank. And every time you put fuel in your petrol tank, you will not take fuel out of your reserve tank. Does that make sense? You got to understand that, right? And I'm going to tell you the reason why. So let's say you go, I'm going to go on a ketogenic diet today, right? Or I'm going to do intermittent fasting, where there's no food coming in, specifically carbohydrates, right? Right, so let's say we drive the 100 mile and we go, fuck, geez, my petrol tank is empty. The dash light has just lit up. The petrol sign is now flashing. Normally you think, oh shit, the petrol light's coming on. I'm going to die a death of agonizing pain because I haven't eaten food today, right? And you think, Jesus Christ, the light's flashing. I need the petrol station. But you drive and you can't come across a petrol station. There's none. You're out in the country somewhere, there's no petrol station. The flashing light then sort of goes out. Well, Jesus, how did that go out? Because you've now started tapping into that reserve tank. The reserve tank is now kicked in, which is your liver. There's a wee pump in the boot. The liver has kicked in a wee pump. It's now started siphoning fuel out of the bag. It's now giving it to you. But as long as you're cruising around 30-40 mile an hour, it's fine. If you want to put your foot in the gas, you're thinking, right, oh, there's a boy that road, he's going 100, I'm going to overtake him. The body's kind of going to go, oh shit, don't have that, right? We don't have that energy there, but I can still cruise along. Now again, as long as your energy demands require you during the day to just cruise about, maybe put your foot in the gas a wee tiny bit, avoid a child, oh, you wee gobshite, but that's it. Then we can just keep using that reserve tank, because the liver will drip feed that, and that's a process called gluconeogenesis. Remember, the body is using carbohydrates as such, but it prefers fat for energy. So when we talk about cellular function or cellular energy requirements, what happens is think about every cell in your body: liver cell, kidney cell, skin cell. Every cell has a function, and that function requires energy. The energy that the cell uses, all cells that human beings know about, any living organism, uses ATP. That's called identity triphosphate. Again, you don't need to know it's triphosphate, 3 phosphate molecules attached together. Anyway, identity triphosphate. And it can produce that either from 1 unit of ATP, from 1 unit of carbohydrates. Again, remember, we're simplifying this as actually glycogen and stuff like that, but carbohydrates, right? So 1 unit of carbohydrates is giving you 1 unit of ATP. Right, now if we're using fat for fuel, right, let's say we're breaking down fat for fuel and we're doing about, but we want energy, 1 unit of fat is going to give you about 32 to 36 units of ATP. You're thinking 1 and 1, 1 and 36, well Jesus, that's definitely a hell of a lot more energy efficiency. So why don't I just use fat for fuel? Which is the benefit of a ketogenic diet or intermittent fasting. You're teaching your body how to use fat for fuel. Therefore, you'll hear me saying to you when we're doing fasting, you should feel like you have more energy. You do, right? Now, you mightn't have instant energy. You mightn't be able to go out and wrestle a bear efficiently, right? Or lift heavier weights in the gym. But we're not trying to be bodybuilders. We're not trying to be the strongest people on the planet. We're trying to just have good energy balance. We're trying to burn fuel. So any energy that I do, any weight training that I do, as long as I'm not trying to perform a personal best, if I'm just using energy, I mightn't care about performance, right? But I want to work. I want to get a good sweat. I want to increase muscle tone because I'm eating my protein. I just need a stimulus for muscle tone. I don't need to be busting big massive weights. I just need a stimulus. Stimulus is that wee bit of effort in the gym. Wee bit of effort in the gym. That's enough to keep that muscle protein working, like we talked about in the protein video. But my energy requirements, where do I want the energy to come from? Well, let's use the reserve tank. Let's stop putting fucking petrol in the tank all the time, because the reserve tank's sitting there. In fact, the reserve tank's getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So why am I putting more energy into the system? It just doesn't make sense. Then we have to think about that is, that's fine if your hormones are all working good and the energy system actually works the way I just described it. But what happens if there's a fault in the system? What happens if there's some way that the body's just not working the way it should do? For example, someone going into perimenopause, menopause, PCOS, or maybe a male who is starting to dip in testosterone and increase in estrogen, right? And basically you're starting to accumulate some belly fat, right? What happens here? So we have to think about what way carbohydrates is then stored. Carbohydrates is stored via insulin. This is one of the issues that we need to think about here, guys. Remember we talked about being able to tap on that reserve tank. Right, we tap on the reserve tank by a process called gluconeogenesis, right? So basically gluconeogenesis, thinking about this is how I remember the word gluconeogenesis, because God, it's not a big word for half 4 in the morning. So gluconeogenesis, we need glucose, which is the form of energy that carbohydrates is broken down to in the body to put into the blood, glucose. Neo means new, and genesis means to mix something from something else. So gluconeogenesis, so it's making glucose, it's making new glucose from something that's not glucose or carbohydrates. Basically it's going to be turning things like, again, we're going to simplify it. It's pyruvate and lactate and all that kind of stuff, but basically let's talk about and glycerol. But let's talk about fat for fuel. So a fatty molecule stored in the body, it's called a triglyceride. So it's 3 glycerol molecules attached on to a fatty acid, right? We break that down to use as gluconeogenesis. So we remember we talked about liberating fat. We liberate fat, things like coffee will liberate fat, green tea will liberate fat, cortisol will liberate fat. So you liberate the fatty molecule from the triglyceride. This now becomes 3 glycerol molecules. The glycerol molecule, again, we're getting too complicated. We'll kick off gluconeogenesis. Let's just say gluconeogenesis turns fat into glucose. So if we need glucose, we're going to get it from the fat, but it's not going to be instant. Think about the wee pump in the back of the liver. The liver has to go and get these triglycerides, break them down, convert that back into glucose, put glucose back into the bloodstream. So it's not instant. It will get it, but as long as your energy demands aren't like, I need to lift this big, heavy, massive weight now, or somebody's going to die. But even then, your body will probably use cortisol and adrenaline and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, we're just cruising along. We just want to burn fat for fuel. So gluconeogenesis. But if there's insulin in your body, right, if you've put petrol in the tank and there's still petrol floating around, there's insulin present. That liver, that pump will not activate if there's glucose in your body, or there's insulin in your body, because it needs a hormone called glucagon. Glucagon is, think glucose is gone, right? Glucagon, that's how I remember it. So if I've used up all the energy that was in the petrol tank starts flashing, right? The body's going to shit. Blood sugar levels, glucose has started to dip very, very low here. That's the petrol light flashing. Remember I said then the petrol light was off? That's because the liver has kicked in. Glucagon is now kicked in, and it's activated gluconeogenesis, where the body will now start using fat for fuel if it's needed as glucose, right? That's how we want to do it. Whenever we eat food, whenever we eat carbohydrates goes into the stomach, it's broken down into glucose, and then your blood sugar levels elevate. You know what it'll do? I did a video for Facebook there last week or something on energy balance and glucose and stuff like that there. I'll repost that up here so you can watch that as well too, so we can get a better understanding, because it is very complicated. Like we talk about just carbohydrates being, you know, a fuel source, it's very complicated. So the body then releases insulin, which goes to the cell, says to the cell, right, I need you to open up so we can let some energy in. Right. So that's your insulin system working. There's a thing then called insulin resistance. Now, this management of the cell, allowing insulin to come, they open a wee door, they let the energy in, is basically managed by estrogen, right? So estrogen keeps the cell wall sensitive to, or the wee receptor sensitive to insulin. When estrogen starts to dip, the cell, right, which has the wee receptor on it, which is basically a doorbell for insulin to ring, they say, can you open up and let some energy in, becomes resistant to insulin. So insulin's normally knocking on the doorbell saying, excuse me, can you let some energy in? And the cell's going, I'm not really working today, so I'm not going to open up, I'm not going to let energy in. So that means the energy doesn't get inside the cell, which means energy's floating about the system, which means it's got nowhere else to go but let's put that in the reserve tank, body fat. But because cortisol is elevated at the same time, because of the same sort of hormonal functions, it doesn't just say let's store as fat, it says specifically let's store that as belly fat, specifically visceral fat, not subcutaneous fat. Remember, subcutaneous fat's the spongy fat you feel on the outside. Visceral fat is accumulation of fat around the organs, which is why you get a bit of a distended stomach. You ever see men with a big pot belly, but they're not really fat, but they've a round belly? That's visceral fat. That's fat accumulating around the organs. That's what women in menopause get as well too. Your belly starts to extend slightly. That's fat accumulating around the organs. That's going to kill you. That's heart disease. That's death. That is the nasty stuff. So the cell becomes resistant to insulin. It's just not working right. Now, if we keep going on a low carbohydrate diet or fasting or keto, and we kick in this gluconeogenesis process to get that body the fuel that it needs, the cell starts to work like a sponge. We start to use the energy up that's inside the cell, just by everyday tasks, and the cell becomes empty, and the cell starts to go, Jesus, there's no energy out there. Right? I haven't heard this doorbell in ages. I haven't opened up. Do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to open the doors myself and see if I can get any in. But in doing that, right, and it's a thing called GLUT4, he'll start to take control of the cell from the inside. Because you're depleting all this energy in here, I'm going to open the door and have a look and see if there's any energy out there, because I haven't heard the doorbell in ages. That then starts to bring back the sensitivity of the doorbell. So whenever carbohydrates do come in, oh, there's that doorbell I haven't heard for years. I can now let the energy come back into the cell and use that carbohydrates more efficiently. But remember, cortisol's still elevated. So if there's too much energy and the cell's full and there's still stuff floating around, it's still going to store as that belly fat, right? Because insulin resistance kicks off a whole cascade of other effects. Do you know what I mean? Triglycerides start to elevate. Triglycerides is basically blood or fat in the bloodstream. That starts to coat the cell wall, which then starts to produce insulin resistance because the fat has now covered the doorbell and insulin can't get at it anymore. So there's a whole pile of stuff that's going on here. So the best rule of thumb here, guys, is just don't eat the fucking carbohydrates, right? I'm sorry to put that so bluntly. Unless you are doing something where you need carbohydrates. If you're a power lifter, you're a bodybuilder, you're a world strongman, right? Do any of us come under those categories? Like, I'm trying to build muscle. I wouldn't call myself a bodybuilder. I just want to look good, right? I'm 49 this year. I want to be able to take off my t-shirt at the beach and not look like a fat mess. I'm not really looking to be a bodybuilder. When I train weights, I do it for muscular function, for functionality, and to utilize carbohydrates and to burn more fat. If I want to burn more fat, I'll add an extra weight session, not an extra cardio session, right? Because my metabolism has to be revved up. I want to use the carbohydrates up more efficiently. I want to use the petrol tank up more, right? Because the energy demands are going to go up. Does that make sense? My metabolism is what's going to dictate how much fat or energy my body requires, even when I'm sleeping, all right? So that's why you want to prioritize using that muscular energy. It brings back that insulin sensitivity and just gets the system working. Does that make sense? So when it comes to carbohydrates basically are energy. If you're not doing anything that requires instant energy at a high demand pace, you don't need carbohydrates, because like I said, your body's going to produce its own carbohydrates anyway through gluconeogenesis from the fat that you've stored. So fasting, because we're going long periods of time with no food, we're specifically going long periods of time with no carbohydrates and no insulin. Therefore, the body's producing glucagon, right? They bring energy back up. Glucagon's breaking down fat for fuel. It is indirectly, but it's breaking down fat they put back into that system. But it can only do that when the petrol tank's empty. the petrol tank's more than empty when we're doing long fasts. Does that make sense? But the problem with long fasts is we're abstaining from food, which means we're also abstaining from protein, which is not good. Right, so that's the double-edged sword that we've got here. So keto works really well. Keto means that there's less carbohydrates coming in, but I'm still eating in regular intervals, so I'm still getting all my fibre, I'm still getting all my nutrients, I'm still getting the fats that I need, because remember, fats are essential for your hormonal function. So if you struggle with losing weight, keto is probably one of your best options. Now, the downside of this is carbohydrates fucking taste nice. They're lovely, right? And we don't really want to feel like we've over-restricted them, because then that leads into other issues. And do you know what I mean? Like, I mean, every social event you go to, every night out you go to, it's a carbohydrate. You go to a restaurant, it's carbohydrates. But so we need to manage these. So intermittent fasting, Monday to Friday, is a great tool if you're going to have some carbohydrates Saturday, Sunday. The way that I did keto, which isn't technically keto, because I was going in and out of ketosis, right, was I would do keto Monday to Friday and have carbs on a Saturday or maybe a Sunday when I was out way as ever. I was having a family dinner or something, or was doing something with the kids. But I manage the carbohydrates, right? Even if I'm in a ladies, you see, whenever you start to think about things like PCOS and menopause and perimenopause, we do have energy balance. Yes, calories is calories in the end of the day, but how your body uses those from a hormonal point of view changes. So it's not all calories are equal, right? Not when there's a hormonal sort of thing going on, because the body just doesn't utilize them efficiently. Like, insulin resistance is kicking in, and insulin resistance is basically borderline type 2 diabetes. Right? Not as severe as that, but when you go into perimenopause and menopause, you are virtually knocking on the door of type 2 diabetes, because the cell just does not use glucose efficiently, and insulin has to go through the roof. Right? If the more your cells are resistant to insulin, the higher insulin has to go. So it's okay you saying, all right, my body's using them. Even if you went to the doctors and you got a hemoglobin A1C test done, hemoglobin A1C is like sort of like a 3-month prior sort of look at where your blood glucose were. A lot of women are coming back and saying, oh, my A1C was good, my hemoglobin A1C was okay, right? But how much insulin did it require for that to happen? That's my concern, because too much insulin and too much cortisol mixed together, lipoprotein lipase, and that then stores fat around the midsection as visceral fat. So you're turning your body into a visceral fat store machine. So there's complications, and sometimes your blood work doesn't always give you a true indicator. But if you're starting to store a wee bit of belly fat, you can guarantee you're insulin resistant. If you're insulin resistant, you do not need carbohydrates. And again, like, unless I said you're a world strongman, you're a power lifter, or you're a bodybuilder looking to actively build muscle, you do not need carbohydrates, because there's only one function, and that's energy, and that's 1 unit of carbohydrates to 1 unit of ATP, as where the other alternative fuel source is fat, which is 1 unit of fat to 32 to 36 units of ATP. So fat's more efficient for energy anyway. All right, does that make sense? All right, so you can see where the problem with the carbohydrates is here, guys, and also as well too, they're hyperpalatable, right? Especially refined carbohydrates, when you get into things like chocolate and all that kind of stuff, because we can overconsume it because it's been refined. Things like the proteins and the fiber has been removed, right? So if you take, say, 1,000 calories of chocolate, which I'm sure you could down pretty darn quick, because I know I fucking could, especially if you give me a glass of white wine. And you take 1,000 calories of bananas, they both have sugar. Molecularly, they're both going to break down and give you the same energy anyway, but the bananas get fiber. Right, so the fiber slows down your ability to eat it, your ability to digest it, and the ability for that blood sugars to go too high, too much energy in the system, and the rest stores as fat, because we can't utilize the energy. Does that make sense? Right? So it's what's in the sugar when you're eating it is going to cause the problem, not what's in the sugar when you digest it. From a molecular point of view, from a glucose point of view, or fructose, when it breaks down into the body and goes into the blood, it's all the same. But if it goes in too quick, too much, too quick, it goes really, really high, the cells can't cope with it, it has to store as fat. So this is why I would always say, listen, even though if you're a keto or something like that, fruit's fine. Eat as much fucking fruit and vegetables as you want, because the digestive process, because there's fiber mixed in through it, slows it down that much. It's not really doing much damage. It's the stuff that goes on really quick, like even white bread, rice, potatoes, all that stuff, right? There's fiber in there, yes, because it's starchy and stuff like that, but it's still just too much energy. If you have fat, guys, here's my rule of thumb, right? If I have over a stone of fat in my body, right, I have stored energy in abundance. This is why I'm telling you, when you're fasting, if you feel that wee ghrelin feeling, as long as there's fat in your body, you have fucking energy and fuel sitting waiting for your body to use. It's stored it there for a reason. I've stored this so whenever we get to this time and there's no carbohydrates around, because it's winter and vegetables and fruit don't grow in the winter because they're seasonal, right, and there's no food around, then I'll use this fat for fuel. But that doesn't happen anymore, guys. There's no winter anymore. Like, I remember, like, I'm babbling here, but anyway, I remember when I was a child, you wouldn't get fruit and vegetables all year round in the supermarket. But now, every day, every time, every day of the year, winter has never come anymore. Winter doesn't come anymore. So you've got to treat your body wisely when it comes to carbohydrates. You're waking up in the morning, oh, but I'm having porridge. Porridge is healthy. Yes, but it's pure fucking carbohydrates. Oh, at lunchtime, I'm going to have a lovely seeded bap or lovely seeded bread, which is high in fiber. Or, oh, it's sourdough. Right, there's no thing with it. There's no there's no flour in it that's going to cause wheat intolerance, gluten intolerance. No gluten in it, right? Gluten's a protein. So but it's sourdough bread. It's still fucking carbohydrates. Oh, at night, I had baby potatoes instead of pasta. They're both fucking carbohydrates, right? They're both energy that your body does not need. If there's food stored, if there's energy stored in abundance around your body, stop it, right? Stop it. Doesn't matter from a molecular point of view if it's a healthy fat, a non-healthy fat, healthy food, non-healthy food, healthy carbohydrate, non-healthy carbohydrate. It's giving you the same issue whenever it's digested and put into your system. A bar of chocolate is the exact same as a banana, but a banana is slower to break down, so it'll go into your system a wee bit slower. The energy in the 100 calories of chocolate, 100 calories of bananas, not the same, right? They're not the same because of the way they're going to be digested and absorbed. So have a think about what the carbohydrates are. Do you need any carbohydrates in your life? Do you need to eat any carbohydrates ever again? If you have over a stone of weight on your stone of body fat in excess, you have a stone of carbohydrates, of energy sitting there ready to be used. Use them. Alright, so that's what we have to think about. Now, again, when we talk about reducing calories, we have metabolic function, we've got hormonal function, all that kind of stuff. So I hope this helps. It's a wee bit long-winded, but even with something as simple as carbohydrates, which is only one function in your body, which is energy, it's very complicated, and there's a lot that goes on in the body and the system and how it works. There's a lot of default things that happen, like perimenopause, PCOS. Like PCOS is basically the cell just cannot manage carbohydrates at all, right? Insulin resistance come perimenopause and menopause. It's the same thing. The cell just does not use sugar well, right? The insulin's going up through the roof. That elevated insulinemia is going to wreck your body. Basically, it's no good for you, right? So we'll talk about that, and I'll post up the other video that if I can look back through Facebook, I'll find it, and I'll post up the link for it, about energy balance. All right, that's a good one to watch to understand the carbohydrates and the fuel concept. All right, have a good day.